Our live coverage from Washington, D.C. continues now, just moments ahead of bilateral discussions and that high-profile meet between President Barack Obama and visiting Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I'm going to hand it over now to Rahul Kavala, managing editor, to take you through our special broadcast from Washington, D.C. Rahul, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Shiv. At this time, Chuck Hagel, the Defense Secretary of the United States, has just finished his meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and immediately after this there will be a call on by Michael O'Malley, the governor of Maryland, here in Washington, and after that is the big summit meeting between President Obama and Prime Minister Modi. And this is what it has all come down to, the business end of this very high profile visit. A joint editorial being released in some form similar to a joint statement which two leaders put out at the end of a summit meeting. But here, in the build-up to this summit discussion, a joint editorial being put out in the late editions of the Washington Post. And the joint editorial really talks about how India and the United States haven't so far been able to live up to the full extent, to the full potential of their relationship, but hope to do so from now on. There are references to Swami Vivekananda, obviously understanding the importance that Prime Minister Modi attaches to the teachings of Swami Vivekananda and what he said at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. The references also to Martin Luther King and his entire campaign for justice for African Americans, and he was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. This is actually a very strong symbolic gesture by these two leaders. It doesn't happen very often for a joint editorial to be penned, officials working through the night and getting the wordings together, getting it approved by both principals and then being able to put it out. In this editorial, there is talk of how the United States wants to help India in the Clean India campaign. It talks about how they want to leverage private and civil society innovation, expertise, technology to improve the sanitation and hygiene standards throughout India. It talks of how these countries have been cooperating in space, in technology. It talks of the roles that Indian Americans have been playing in bringing these two countries closer together and now form a bridge between India and the United States. But most importantly, it talks about Homeland security, it talks about terror, it talks about coming together to share intelligence through counter-terrorism and law enforcement cooperation so that they can work together to maintain the freedom of navigation and lawful commerce across the seas. So very significant symbolic points being made over here. But in these meetings, I must tell you that from what we've been able to gather now by speaking to senior officials and businessmen who were present in these meetings, the American business leaders have been talking tough with Modi. When they came and met Mr. Modi, they explained to them exactly the problems they were facing, and they were very candid and upfront about it. There was no beating around the bush, no trying to couch it in diplomacies. They were very upfront about what the problems were. They were very business-minded. They explained what they were expecting from the Prime Minister, and that was explained to Modi, who promised to act on the problems that have been raised. I also want to bring in now my colleague Rajdeep Sardesai. He's joining us from right outside White House. Rajdeep, enjoyed the Garba last evening. Now down to the business end of this meeting. What are you making of this joint editorial that's been put out by Modi and Obama?
You know, Rahul, the Garba outside the White House, in the gardens just outside the White House, was possibly unprecedented. I don't think anyone has ever seen Garba and Bhangra outside the White House on the White House lawns. And the joint editorial in the Washington Post is certainly unprecedented, at least in the context of Indo-US relations. The leaders of the two countries are issuing a joint editorial. With me is Alisa Ayres, still of the Council on Foreign Relations. She doesn't remember when this last happened. Also joining me is Professor Nuruddin of Georgetown University here in Washington. Rahul there was just talking about how there seems to be generally a sense that even before a joint statement is brought about, let's set the terms for the engagement and hence bring out a joint editorial. Do you believe that's the two sides making it clear to the world that, reports of the demise of this relationship or the decline of this relationship are grossly exaggerated? This is still a relationship of the future of the 21st century. So this statement, in a sense, is also designed, or the joint editorial is designed to in some way silence some of the skeptics and cynics?
I think that sounds just right. Silence the skeptics, remind people what the U.S.-India partnership is about and where the sights should be cast for progress moving ahead.
You know, the one word which kept coming was growth, trade, economy. You know, we will work together towards strengthening each other's economy, or towards prosperity. Now, that's easier said than done. You know, as we've been discussing, opening up of markets, access to markets, not easy issues requiring legal, change in laws. Do you believe we are being overly ambitious in believing that, the investment climate can be dramatically improved?
There's nothing wrong with being ambitious, and people have to be ambitious if you ever want to accomplish anything at all. If you're not ambitious, then you don't get anything done and you don't work towards a larger goal. So it matters to try to be ambitious and set goals much beyond where things currently are. That said, of course there are problems in the trade and investment relationship. I think that is quite well known for your audience. It's certainly well known in the United States. We've had some significant differences on issues involving the appropriate use of local content requirements or issues involving investment caps, things like this. Those are pretty technical and they'll have to get discussed at a very technical level. It's my understanding that the U.S. and India are looking to reconvene the Trade Policy Forum, which is a cabinet level, a ministerial level gathering between the Minister of Commerce and Industry and our U.S. Trade Representative. That should hopefully be scheduled at some point later in this fall. That's a forum that hasn't met since 2010. So we are desperately in need of a very, very serious and difficult conversation on some of these tough trade issues. I'm not trying to minimize them. It's going to be a tough conversation, but we'll have to have those conversations to overcome the differences.
Do you believe, Professor, the differences outweigh the areas of convergence? When I see in the joint statement, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, yes, we know that these two countries have much in common. But do you believe over the years, particularly in recent years, the differences, whether it be on outsourcing, whether it be on trade, whether it be on the civil nuclear deal, some way outweigh the areas of convergence? And that makes this a more difficult relationship than we might have imagined a few years ago.
The relationship is in great shape, in that sense. And so much of the talk of rebooting the relationship, I think, is overdone, largely because India and the United States have always been friends in the grander sense of things. But the difficult issues now remain difficult. India has made it clear that food security is a major issue. It's unclear to me that anything in the statement today is going to get away from that. But the statement, as Alyssa pointed out, is crucial because all the hard work of negotiating these trade agreements, these investment climate agreements, will be done by hardworking bureaucrats on both sides. But the heads of state set the tone, and the heads of government, rather, set the tone by which those negotiations will conduct. And what this op-ed does today is say that we want this relationship to be better, we want it to be more productive, and hopefully that will allow people to find ways to agree.
We were discussing this last night. There are ways in which there are areas where Barack Obama and Narendra Modi are very similar. They're both outsiders in a sense to the establishment. Obama from Chicago, Modi from Gujarat, both of them great believers in technology, in social media, great communicators, great orators. Do you believe that between them, the areas of convergence might actually outweigh the areas of difference? Many believe ideologically they're different, but purely in personality terms, there's a lot in common between Modi and Obama, more than we might have imagined.
I think that's exactly right. And in fact, prior to Modi having written the textbook on how to run a 21st century campaign, President Obama had done that. The first edition is Obama 08. And in that sense, there's also a corrective and maybe a hint of caution that President Obama could point out to Prime Minister Modi that things change quickly, that an agreement, if we're going to have it, has to happen while Prime Minister Modi has the momentum and the support of the Indian people to make the kind of changes that are going to be required. But if the economy doesn't pick up, if, God forbid, there are difficulties in terms of conflict on either border or domestically, all of a sudden Prime Minister Modi is going to find it harder to fight the fights he needs to get trade unions to agree to reforming labor laws, to get farmer to agree to compromises on intellectual property rights and so on. So the point I'm trying to make is that, and I think Alyssa was saying this as well, we want to see an initiative quickly building on this latest op-ed, actually setting dates for meetings at a pretty high level.
You use the word quickly. Alisa, are the Americans impatient? Do the Americans get impatient very quickly? That if in the next 1 year Narendra Modi or the Indian establishment doesn't deliver on A, B, C, D, then the Americans will sort of move on. To put it a different way, does the US have the appetite at the moment for this kind of sustained engagement with India, given that, the situation in the Middle East, the fact that Syria, ISIL, dominating your headlines, your foreign policy establishment, where does India stand in terms of attention span for this presidency?
So the most important thing and the biggest challenge in foreign policy is making sure to keep the work going on long-term issues of strategic importance while you're dealing with the crises coming into the inbox every day. India is a high priority part of the U.S. long-term vision for engagement in the 21st century. You've seen that India is an important strategic component of what the U.S. sees as the rebalance to Asia or pivot to Asia. So when the United States government looks at the world, India is one of the most important countries that the U.S. wants to make sure to further its relationship with in the years ahead. Now, that said, since 2011 and the events and the turmoil in the Middle East, now what's happening in the Ukraine, there have been a series of tumultuous developments in the world that have pulled the United States in more deeply. This is an area sometimes where the fact that India is not a problem can sometimes push India a little bit to the side of the everyday inbox. It's the problem countries that rise to the top. Oh my God, what are we going to do about this crisis? And India isn't a crisis. India is a friend and a partner. We have some differences, but India is not a kind of, oh my goodness, hair on fire, what do we do about the world? So that is, in a sense, if we can work together and deepen that relationship on some of these very challenging global situations, like in the Middle East, which I hope the two leaders will discuss today, then I think that will keep the strategic partnership moving forward in a deeper way.
Let me ask you this before I hand over to Rahul. Do you believe that there is that area of convergence even in the Middle East? The US is sometimes worried about India's stand on Iran, for example. The US is not convinced that India is on the same side as Washington when it comes to Iran. But in the larger context of ISIL, of Syria, do you believe that India and the US can forge the kind of partnership, be a shared coalition at international fora? Yesterday, in the vision statement, President Obama spoke about a reformed UN Security Council, something that India has been asking for a while. Do you believe that there are areas where India and the US can actually work together, given the present challenge of global terror?
I think so, and I think the record of India's participation both in Afghanistan and in Iraq bodes well for this. India has been a large part of the reconstruction efforts in both those countries. Hamid Karzai thanked India explicitly in his address to the UN General Assembly. The fact is that India is an ally in this and it has shared interests. Terrorism is a major concern for both of these countries. And ISIL and Al-Qaeda have made it clear that India is on their agenda, that the promulgation of an Islamic State includes, of course, India. The problem, of course, there, as always, is Pakistan, where the India-US relationship is concerned. I do think it's true that there is a greater understanding in Washington that Pakistan is an issue, but it's not clear to me that the White House is willing to call Pakistan on the mat in the way that India would need for this relationship to go forward.
Basically, to take Alisa's point, Pakistan is the problem country. India is not the problem country. The US is, the US sees Pakistan presumably as a problem country, India as a solution country.
I think that's right. In fact, if you look at the list of areas of collaboration between India and the United States, that list of areas that have been going very well, some of those are very forward-looking, kind of how do we set the agenda for solutions in the next century? And that's where we get back to some of this collaboration on clean energy, obviously an area of great priority for President Obama. Prime Minister Modi is speaking a lot about clean energy, a clean India, science and technology. Again, how do we find solutions? How do we work with our space technology to help better ordinary lives?
In fact, that clean energy idea and the clean India idea, it's a great symbolic gesture.
Yeah.
If the United States, as per this joint editorial, is able to work with the Narendra Modi government in supporting India's Clean India initiative, that's a huge step forward. I mean, it's an area where the United States could provide technology, as the joint editorial seems to suggest, to take Narendra Modi's Clean India drive forward.
Absolutely, and I think you'll find there are a lot of American companies that are working hard to develop sustainable technology solutions for some of these energy challenges that would be excited about working in India if the business environment is right and the business environment makes sense for their business model.
That's right. And just to conclude that, is this G2B then, government to business, even when it comes to Clean India? Is that the way forward? Is that the nature of the relationship?
On the U.S. side, it has to be. I mean, there is no U.S. Government agency that's going to provide clean sanitation and toilets to the Indian people. That is what American business does well. It's what American civil society does well. Finding partners on the Indian side in civil society and business, that's a trick. And what we're likely to find is, as you said, G2B, and whether that relationship can work, that's the real secret, isn't it?
Okay. Rahul, I'm going to toss back to you because I can see that there is going to be some movement in a little while. If my camera can just pan slightly to the right, because you can see that the entire road outside the White House now slowly being sanitized because Prime Minister Modi, who's staying at Blair House, just a 5-minute walk really from the White House, will be coming there shortly. I can see some movement within the White House as well. So we expect the Prime Minister to be here, in about an hour from now. But clearly the security systems are being set in place for that summit meeting between the two leaders. All set, in a sense, for the summit meeting. Expectations is always high, but sometimes, as this joint editorial does reflect, it's best to look for the low-hanging fruit and take them forward. Clean India, a US-India joint initiative, would be a good way to start on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday on October 2nd. That could set the stage, in a sense, for a meeting ground between the Indian Prime Minister and the US President. Back to you, Rahul.